In a previous video, I tried to help you guys get through the tutorial for Last Oasis as soon as possible, and in this video I'd like to try and give you an idea of what you could work on as soon as that tutorial is over. During the tutorial, you'll be given something called fragments that you can use to learn different skills in your tech tree, but once the tutorial is over, you'll have to go about earning all of those fragments yourself. By killing Rupu and looting their camps, you can sometimes earn a few fragments at a time, but by far the most efficient way to farm fragments is to look for some of the wreckages all around each oasis. You can find wreckages in any of the medium or hard mode oasis, but in my opinion the best way to go about this is just by cruising around a spacious medium oasis. On top of that, I would recommend sticking to the area just outside of some of the more resource-lush areas of the map towards the center, but still in the desert. If you're in dire need of other resources, it's probably best that you start off in the center of the map where you can gather up some more resources while looking for wreckages, but in my experience, it's much easier to find the wreckages and to see other players, if that's something you're worried about, while you're out in the desert. Just make sure that you don't go too far out in the desert or you'll stop finding any of the wreckages. Now before you head out to farm some fragments, it would be a really good idea to make sure that you have a fair amount of water both on your person and stored away in your walker. This will just increase the amount of time that you'll be able to stay out farming fragments before you need to harvest some cacti. Additionally, you should have at least one weapon or items to create additional weapons because some of the containers will need to be damaged before you can loot them. In the few maps that I've explored while farming fragments, I can say that it does seem that these wreckages tend to spawn pretty frequently around any of the trading stations as long as they're out in the desert. I don't know if this is true everywhere, but it has been true in those few maps. The wreckages themselves are pretty easy to spot, at least some of the larger ones, but they do come in all shapes and sizes. There are a few smaller wreckages that can easily be missed if you don't know what you're looking for, and these will either have a dangling loot bag or a skeleton that you can easily loot, or will also have a barrel that you'll need to break into. For the medium wreckages, you'll find a structure that has a bag on the ground that you'll easily be able to loot, and a box that you'll need a ballista to break into, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Additionally, there is another medium-sized wreckage, this time having a stairway going up to a platform, again with a bag that you can easily loot, but just below that there'll be another crate, this time requiring fire bolts to open, and I honestly wouldn't recommend putting the time into trying to break into these because the resources are kind of high. Lastly, and probably the easiest one to spot with the naked eye, is the large wreckage, and this will show as a stairway going up to a platform with a bag you can easily loot and a box you'll need to break into. Directly overhead there will be an outstretched piece of wood that you can grapple up to, and at the end of that piece of wood you'll find a loot bag that typically only has 1 or 2 fragments, so it's completely up to you if you want to waste the time to get up there, but if you're pretty good at using your grappling hook, it's also a great vantage point to spot other players or look for other wreckage. While looting any of these wreckages, in addition to those fragments, you can also get yourself some tools and basic gear, crafting materials, extra bandages, and something called modules, which are a walker upgrade. If you have the gear storage unlocked on your walker, you can easily slot several sets of base gear in there in case you should die and need to respawn and have some starter gear. Or if you have the cargo upgrade unlocked, you can easily store away some free crafting materials at the same time. Now we're not going to go over any of the modules here in this video, but I would recommend trying to save those if you have the storage space, as later on these will come in very handy. In addition to all of that loot, you will earn XP for opening each one of these bags, and while it's not a ton, you could still technically earn some levels if you farm fragments long enough. Towards the beginning of unlocking any of your skill trees, it's a good idea that if you earn about 10 fragments or more, that you take the time to unlock something in your skill tree rather than hanging on to all those fragments. If you do come across another player and they kill you while you have those fragments, all those fragments are gone, but if you spend them, no one can take them away from you. While farming fragments, if the time should come where you do actually run out of water, rather than just gathering some cacti out in the desert, I recommend heading back towards the center of the oasis. Now, how far you go into the center of the oasis is completely up to you, but I would recommend that you try to farm some Rupu and their camps so you can get some wood shafts and Rupu vines. Just be sure that before you head back into the desert, you've also gathered up enough cactus to make yourself some more water. So now that you have a pretty good idea of how to regularly farm up some fragments, what should you spend them on? Really, it's anything that you want to unlock or are interested in, but I would make some general recommendations before you go unlocking things like additional walkers. Arguably, one of the very first upgrades that any new player should be going for are the gathering tools. This would be the Rawbone Hand Axe, Simple Pick, and Simple Sickle. Not only will these tools help you gather more materials, for instance, in the case of gathering stone, you no longer have to gather it a single piece at a time and can instead go to some of the larger rock deposits and get a ton all at once, but in the case of the Rawbone Hand Axe, you'll actually end up with a pretty decent weapon in addition to a better axe that will get you more wood from trees. After that, and if you haven't already, I would highly recommend unlocking the Sterile Bandage. This will take some fiber weave as well as some aloe vera in order to craft, and while the primitive bandages are fairly easy to make, sterilized bandages heal for so much more and heal faster at the same time. As far as crafting stations, the only one I would really focus on is getting yourself the woodworking station and then unlocking wood shafts. Up until this point, the only way to obtain wooden shafts is to kill Rupu and loot their camps, but after crafting that table, you can easily craft as many of those wooden shafts as you end up needing for any given craft. If you're using a walker that can pack bases, even the smallest of bases, I would highly recommend getting yourself the small chest upgrade. Considering you could stack multiple chests on a single base, you could drastically increase the amount of storage you have at your disposal. Along that same line, I would recommend unlocking the foraging pouch. This will add an additional bag of storage that you can only use for some organic material, and honestly, I don't even really use this all that much, but you will need to unlock the foraging pouch before you can unlock something I think is much better, which would be the light backpack. While small storage chests will increase your overall storage, a backpack will increase your individual player storage, which can come in handy, especially if you're trying to gather a ton of materials at once. As I said earlier, these are recommendations mostly before you purchase your next walker. Still, there is one walker upgrade that I think will be well worth your time, especially if you're struggling to mount the walker. The Walker Climber is something you can build on your walker, and simply by aiming your grappling hook towards the Walker Climber, you can instantly mount the walker. As a final recommendation, and this is mostly just so that you can make this fragment farm as efficient as possible, I would highly recommend unlocking the ballista as well as a flint harpoon. When I was talking about the different types of wreckages, I mentioned that there is one medium-sized wreckage that has a box that you will need a ballista for. Dragging it behind you or into stuff, you can actually deal damage to the box, and once it opens up, you'll typically get about 20 fragments every time. In some cases, 20 fragments is the equivalent of farming 3 or 4 other wreckages, so I highly recommend this upgrade if you intend to farm fragments pretty regularly. Anyway guys, that's basically all I wanted to cover here in this video. I just wanted to give you some ideas as to what to do after the tutorial, and to help you figure out how to unlock more crafts, since this is a survival game and crafting is a big part of it. I do have a few other Last Oasis videos planned in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. But for now, as always, thank you so much for watching this or any other one of my videos, and I'll see you in the next one.